A new countdown, another threat, and headlines screaming that NATO just threatened to decapitate the Kremlin in 49 days. But what's really behind these viral warnings? Tonight, let's break down what's fact, what's theater, and what it all means for us, right now. First things first, there's no official ultimatum, no formal 49-day countdown from NATO, Trump, or the Pentagon to Russia. The claims circulating online, fueled by certain senators, media influencers, and social media accounts, are loud. But when you look for real statements from government or military channels, you hit a wall. Instead, what we're actually seeing is a familiar pattern. Politicians floating deadlines, the media amplifying the message, and public anxiety ticking higher with every headline. So, why do these stories go viral? Why now? The answer is timing. We're in the middle of election season in the US. Europe is preparing for the possibility of a long, grinding war in Ukraine, and Moscow is signaling its own escalation both on the ground and in its rhetoric. It's a perfect storm for speculation, but the facts remain the same. No one in a position of authority has threatened a real decapitation strike, and there's no public evidence of a hard deadline for war. What does exist is a contest of narratives, each side trying to seize control of the story, the pace, and the public's fear. Let's pause for a moment and break down why stories like decapitation strikes and looming deadlines catch on so quickly, and why they never really disappear from the global stage. There's a historical pattern here. These kinds of warnings, ultimatums, and countdowns have been used as levers of power for decades, not just to scare the public, but to move the chess pieces of international diplomacy. Think back to the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, where Kennedy's red lines and Khrushchev's counter deadlines were as much about public messaging and posturing as about missiles and submarines. The aim wasn't just to signal resolve to the other side, it was to galvanize domestic audiences and create negotiating leverage under the threat of catastrophe. Fast forward to 2013, when the phrase "red line over chemical weapons in Syria" became a global rallying cry, shaping policy, alliance debates, and headlines even after it was technically blurred. Or look at Iran's nuclear standoffs, where every year seems to bring another doomsday deadline or point of no return. These narratives don't just appear, they're manufactured, often deliberately by policymakers who understand the psychological and strategic value of a ticking clock. The big difference today is the speed and reach of the message. Thanks to social media, a single statement from a US senator, Russian official, or even a minor analyst can spread globally in seconds, amplified by viral headlines and thumbnails engineered to stoke emotion and anxiety. The impact is exponential. What once took days or weeks to circulate is now front and center within minutes, and the initial framing, no matter how exaggerated, tends to stick. But there's a deeper logic at work. Ultimatums and crisis narratives aren't just noise, they're tools. For national leaders, they're a way to signal resolve, test adversaries' reactions, or create time and space for back-channel negotiations without actually pulling the trigger. For politicians in the heat of campaign season, it's a shortcut to looking tough on foreign policy, even if the real substance is lacking. And for rival powers like Moscow or Beijing, these narratives become ammunition. They flip the script, present themselves as victims or defenders, and use the same headlines to justify their own escalation or repression. The end result? Public opinion becomes a battleground manipulated by carefully crafted signals and counter-signals. So next time you hear about a deadline, a strike, or an ultimatum, ask yourself who stands to gain, who's shaping the narrative, and what's the intended ripple effect on voters, on allies, on adversaries, and on the negotiation table itself. Stay with me, because in the next section, I'll show you how to use this mindset to filter out the noise and get a clearer view of what's really driving global events right now. Let's dig into what decapitation strike really means and why it keeps popping up every time tensions flare. In military theory, a decapitation strike is the idea of launching a precise attack designed to eliminate the political or military leadership of an adversary, cutting off the head, to disrupt the ability to coordinate a response. On paper, it sounds clean and strategic. In reality, it's one of the most provocative and dangerous strategies ever conceived. There's a reason it's almost never attempted, and when it is, like the failed CIA-backed attempts against Castro or the targeted strikes on Saddam Hussein at the start of the Iraq War, the results are usually messy, unpredictable, and come with enormous fallout. No Western country, including NATO as an alliance, has ever adopted a decapitation strike as standard doctrine. In fact, the very notion is mostly used as a deterrent or a rhetorical threat, rather than a credible military option. Why? Because every credible analyst and military planner knows that trying to cut off the head of a nuclear-armed nation is a recipe for catastrophic escalation. The immediate risk is retaliation, not just from surviving leaders, but from a chain of command that might be automated, fragmented, or prone to panic. The ultimate nightmare is the dead hand scenario, where nuclear or strategic responses are launched automatically if top leadership is taken out, regardless of the consequences. Think of it. Would any NATO officials seriously announce a plan that could set off that kind of doomsday machine? Absolutely not. Yet the term survives because it's a powerful signal, a warning that's as much about perception as about military reality. That's why both Russia and the West keep this language in their toolbox. Russia often accuses the West of plotting decapitation strikes to justify their own escalatory posture, to rally domestic support, and to send a warning to NATO. Don't even think about it. On the other side, Western officials may talk about all options on the table or highlight advanced capabilities, but always with deliberate vagueness, never spelling out direct threats to leadership. What ends up in the headlines is a carefully managed performance of strength and resolve, more information warfare than operational planning. This brings us to the present. The current wave of stories about a 49-day decapitation deadline, just like the September 1st attack rumors, are not born from concrete military planning. They're products of the broader information war that is raging alongside the actual conflict. They are meant to sow uncertainty, rally audiences, and pressure decision makers. And if you want real proof, don't get distracted by the loudest voices or most dramatic predictions. Pay attention instead to the subtler but far more significant signals, the actual movements of forces, changes in logistics, or surges in intelligence activity. These are the true indicators of shifting strategy and genuine escalation. In a moment, I'll walk you through what's actually moving on the ground right now, so stay tuned. Zoom out from the social media storms and political sound bites, and what actually emerges is a landscape of constant signaling, testing, and recalibration. Yes, NATO surveillance flights, particularly the AWACS and RC-135 reconnaissance missions, are now a daily reality along the alliance's eastern flank. Every time a NATO plane lifts off from Germany or the UK and runs a circuit near Kaliningrad or the Black Sea, it's both gathering valuable intelligence and sending Moscow a message. We're watching, and we're ready. Meanwhile, Ukraine's air defense is now among the densest on the continent, with American Patriots and German IRIS-T systems plugged into an ever-changing web of radar and intercept protocols. Behind the scenes, Poland has quietly transformed itself into a logistical superhub. Trainloads of military equipment roll east, airfields see round-the-clock flights, and NATO's rapid deployment exercises are now routine rather than exceptional. Germany, for decades reluctant to show its military muscle, is suddenly hosting pre-positioned U.S. armored brigades and building out infrastructure that could support much larger force surges if required. The Baltic states, acutely aware of their geography, have hardened their border defenses and now regularly host multinational exercises that integrate cyber, drone, and special operations units in a way that was rare even 5 years ago. On the western side, the US and UK are quietly shuffling high-value assets, think strategic bombers, electronic warfare platforms, or even elements of the nuclear triad, into rotational deployments, ensuring that deterrence isn't just a paper promise. None of these moves, in isolation, point to war tomorrow. But collectively, they set the tempo. If Russia ever tried to test the alliance, there would be no soft start. The same applies on the Russian side. The uptick in missile tests, particularly of dual-capable systems that blur the lines between conventional and nuclear, is as much about advertising capability as it is about genuine war preparation. Russian troop movements toward the western borders and snap readiness drills are meant to signal strength to both external rivals and internal audiences. Nuclear rhetoric, though alarming, is deployed with careful timing, often coinciding with Western announcements or major NATO summits. This is the classic logic of deterrence. Each move is a calculated step in a larger game, designed to shape the choices and perceptions of the other side without crossing the threshold into direct conflict. Think of it less as a standoff at high noon, more as a cold, high-stakes chess match. Each player is probing for weakness, shoring up defenses and telegraphing red lines. And while headlines blare about decapitation or countdowns, the real professionals, military planners, intelligence analysts, diplomats are focused on the details. They track sudden surges in supply convoys, unexplained changes in force deployment patterns, or unexpected bursts of encrypted diplomatic communications. These are the clues that matter, not always visible to the public, but critical to those reading the board. And sometimes, it's the absence of noise, the drills that don't get announced, the assets that go dark, that signal the biggest shifts. Stay with me, because next I'll point out an under-the-radar trend that could tell us more about where this high-stakes contest is headed than any headline ever will. You might be wondering, if these threats are exaggerated or even fabricated, why do they keep returning? The answer is simple. Fear is a powerful tool. Politicians leverage it to push agendas or rally support. Media outlets use it for clicks, ratings, and advertising dollars. Adversaries weaponize it to sow division and undermine trust. For regular people, it can be paralyzing or, ironically, desensitizing. The more you hear about imminent war or decapitation strikes, the harder it is to distinguish real risk from manufactured crisis. But there's another layer. The constant repetition of worst-case scenarios conditions the public to expect chaos, which can make it easier for decision makers to justify extreme policies, like emergency spending, expanded surveillance, or even preemptive military action. So the next time you see a viral warning, don't just ask, "Is it true?" Ask, "Who wants me to feel this way? What's the benefit?" In a few seconds, I'll give you a simple method to track the real signals behind the noise. Here's something most people miss when they're glued to the headlines. Real risk rarely arrives with a siren blaring or a deadline in all caps. Instead, it creeps in through the patterns, small but telling shifts that, for the trained eye, say far more than any public warning. When you want to know if the situation is actually escalating, start by tuning out the loudest voices and start scanning for out-of-pattern moves. Has a major military base suddenly gone to heightened alert without public explanation? That's often a sign that behind-the-scenes intelligence has picked up something unusual, maybe satellite imagery, intercepted communications, or a surge in enemy cyber probing. Did a diplomatic summit, originally planned months ahead, suddenly get pulled forward or moved behind closed doors? These last-minute changes usually mean the stakes have shifted, or a crisis is brewing that needs immediate face-to-face negotiation before it spills into public view. The same goes for financial markets. Sudden, unexplained sanctions, large-scale asset freezes, or abrupt changes in oil and gas flows aren't just economic stories. They're often signals that governments are bracing for impact, securing resources, punishing adversaries, or locking down vulnerabilities in anticipation of trouble. But don't stop there. One of the sharpest tools for reading geopolitics is to track the language used by officials, both allies and adversaries. If, seemingly overnight, you notice US, European, and even Chinese spokespeople all adjusting their messaging, using the same keywords, warnings, or diplomatic phrasing, it's rarely coincidence. This kind of coordination typically means something significant is happening behind closed doors, whether it's a breakthrough, a setback, or an emerging threat that hasn't yet made the evening news. But here's the real secret. Don't get whiplash from every breaking update or shocking headline. The news cycle thrives on adrenaline and urgency, but true situational awareness comes from zooming out, watching the flow of events, and waiting for confirmation from sources with track records of credibility. Most urgent alerts fade without impact. The ones that matter reveal themselves through persistent, verifiable action. So next time you see the words imminent threat in your feed, pause. Ask what's actually changed on the ground, and look for patterns that stand up to scrutiny, not just noise built for clicks. So what should we really take away from this new wave of 49-day countdowns and talk of Kremlin decapitation? The world is in a high-stakes period of competition and signaling. Both sides use information warfare to shape public perception and strategic calculations. As viewers, our best defense is skepticism, patience, and focus on substance over spectacle. And as a community, we have an opportunity to create a space where we challenge the noise, question every narrative, and look for truth together. Do you agree, or do you think we're missing a critical warning? Drop your take in the comments, and I'll highlight the smartest perspectives in the next update. Plus, in just a second, I'll tease what we're tracking for next week, a story with even bigger implications. Bottom line, as these narratives escalate, the risk isn't just in what politicians say, but in how ordinary people react. The best way to prepare for uncertainty isn't panic, it's paying attention, staying flexible, and never letting fear drive your decisions. If you've watched this far, you're part of the Safety Zone community that values real analysis over hype. Subscribe now, join the conversation, and don't let your worldview be set by someone else's headline.